Good morning, and welcome to Redeemer Lutheran Church. I'm Pastor Gary Lodeholt. Maybe you've never noticed, but many hymnals, including the one my church uses, have the hymns arranged by topic or theme. There are sections of hymns that are all devoted to hope, for example, and other sections like trust, community in Christ, Easter, and so on. I mention all that because the book of Psalms often collects similar type psalms together. And one example is that the final few psalms are all intense songs of praise to God. That is certainly true of Psalm 146. In this psalm, the psalmist gives praise to God for God's wonderful activity in the world, and especially in making the wrong of the world right. I'll also mention that these same verses can be quite a challenge to us, to our complacent lifestyles, even to the nature of our world nowadays. In the middle of this psalm we read, "Happy are those whose help is the God of Jacob, whose hope is in the Lord their God, who made heaven and earth, the sea and all that is in them, who keeps faith forever, who executes justice for the oppressed, who gives food to the hungry, who sets the prisoners free. The Lord opens the eyes of the blind. The Lord lifts up those who are bowed down. The Lord loves the righteous. The Lord watches over the strangers. He upholds the orphan and the widow. But the way of the wicked he brings to ruin." If we are going to try to make our world like the world God intends, we've got some work to do. However, for today, I want to point out the first half of verse 8 in that psalm. The Lord opens the eyes of the blind. Now, that little phrase can operate two ways. It can mean the restoration of sight to those who are physically blind, and it can also mean that fresh insight and new understanding is bestowed as well. Our plan for this week is to explore and talk about stories in the Bible that involve blindness. And I am certain we will encounter stories of blindness being healed and sight restored. I suspect that as we do, we will also find fresh insights and new understandings that open our eyes. So let's begin. Today we want to consider two separate events when Jesus restored sight to someone who was blind. In Matthew 12, we encounter this little story. "Then they brought to him a demoniac who was blind and mute, and he cured him, so that the one who had been mute could speak and see. All the crowds were amazed and said, 'Can this be the son of David?' But when the Pharisees heard it, they said, 'It is only by Beelzebul, the ruler of the demons, that this fellow casts out the demons.'" It's an amazing miracle of compassion and grace, the restoration of sight and speech to this man. We need to remember that in those days they didn't have all the medical and scientific knowledge that we have today, and so they accorded many diseases and ailments to being possessed by a demon. That seems to be the case here, and there are a couple of things that need to be said. First, that spiritual disease can lead to physical disease. And second, while in our sophistication we might say it was just something physical, we also need to allow for the possibility that there were demonic forces at work. Remember that Jesus fights the battle with evil on our level, but also on the spiritual level as well. We should note also that Jesus is victorious in both. Perhaps the other thing we need to pay attention to here is the response of the Pharisees. They weren't ready to receive or perceive the new thing that God was doing among them. The man with the demon had a physical blindness. The Pharisees were spiritually blind. Then they do just about the worst thing you can do. They attributed the good work of God to Satan. This is the worst kind of blasphemy. The challenge to us is, of course, to have our own eyes opened. In so many ways, we are blinded by our own expectations and complacencies and pride that we know who God is and what God will do. We are so full of those demonic forces that we fail to see what God is already doing and who God is in each moment. In so many ways, we think this is a story about a person who was blind. It's really about the Pharisees who are also blind. It's really about us. The other passage I want to mention today also comes from Matthew. In chapter 15, we have a general story of Jesus healing those who are blind along with some others. Great crowds came to him, bringing with them the lame, the maimed, the blind, the mute, and many others. They put them at his feet, and he cured them, so that the crowd was amazed when they saw the mute speaking, the maimed whole, the lame walking, and the blind seeing. And they praised the God of Israel. There were great crowds of people, and what that tells us of is the abundance of God's love and grace. Jesus gave the gift of healing and love. Maybe, however, you didn't notice the other part, how the crowds brought those people in need of healing to Jesus. They acted in compassion for those among them who were in need. The crowds hoped on their behalf. Having received the love of Jesus themselves, they brought others in need for it too. Then finally, we need to note the response. They praised God. That's the thing to do whenever we receive God's love and grace. We give God praise. By the way, God's love and grace surrounds us always. There's an old poem that speaks of a little boy having gone to church and on his way home zigzagging all over the place and shouting praise to God. A neighbor saw him and asked what he was doing. The man called to the boy and said, Very fine way," the neighbor said, "for a boy to spend his time. If you can tell me where God is, I'll give you a brand new dime." Quick as a flash the answer came, nor were his accents faint. "I'll give you $1, mister, if you can tell me where God ain't." May our eyes be opened to see God everywhere and every when. Thanks for watching, and remember to let this day belong to God.